Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm Sethum and welcome back to another video. This time around I'm going to do something a bit different, and I am going to talk about several things that I think would improve the PvE and gameplay overall for Conan Exiles. So if you guys enjoyed this video and find it useful, please don't forget to support me and the channel by hitting that like button, subscribe to the channel if you're new and haven't already for more similar content from myself. And if you have just subscribed, why not check out some of my other videos and guides here on this channel? Who knows, you might just enjoy them. Also, for those interested, you can always find me on the Sethtopia Discord. Links to this, of course, you can find down below in the video description, as well as in a pinned comment from myself. So, let's talk about things that I like and would like to see more of in this particular game. Now, with the test live version, there is a dungeon that people can try out. I think that dungeon is amazing, both from the visual aspect as well as the bosses. The bosses are definitely a challenge, and I would definitely like to see more stuff like that coming forward. Now, I'd like to be more specific. I'd like to see more bosses that have similar mechanics with the demon boss, where there's a lot of stuff to look out for. There's a ton of ads to worry about. There's environmental hazards, but also I'd like to see that the bosses can, of course, vary in terms of mechanics. So not just to say mechanics regurgitated, but similar things to do. I think that boss is amazing. I love the challenge of trying to fight that boss, and it does make use of the NPC thralls that you have with you. So I like what the devs have done there in that particular dungeon. Now, I know there's a lot of people that moan about having to use and rely on the thrall too much, but the way I look at it is, if the devs decided to allow thralls in dungeons, that means it's a mechanic similar to having armor on yourself and high value weapons when you go into a dungeon. So it'd be senseless and pointless from my perspective to do that dungeon without a thrall. It's as vital as a good set of armor and weapons. So that's the way I look at it. If it's allowed in there, the devs intended it for the dungeon to be like that, and so therefore there's no point. I mean, it's probably doable without a thrall, but why would you want to do it that way? Now, in the past, the dungeons have been alright, but they weren't really all that challenging. And to be fairly honest, if you do make a dungeon that's challenging, I personally like that the rewards merit the challenge, if that makes sense. Eventually, I'd also say that with the rewards, or with regards to the rewards, I would like to see unique rewards coming from the difficult dungeons. Now, what I mean by unique rewards, I want stuff that people can go in the dungeon to farm over and over with a high, or I meant with a low drop chance, for example. So unique items, they don't have to be necessarily overpowered. When I say unique items, I don't say overpowered. They have to just look good and maybe have some functionality to it, some practical functionality. So for example, the Sword of Crom and the Lifeblood Spear, they had a practical use, but then they got nerfed. I'm talking about visually pleasing items that both have functionality. So for example, the Doom two-handed hammer looks good and it's also visually pleasing, but also I think that what the devs could do is to add some particle effects to weapons. Some, you know, for example, the mace on the smoke demon in the cellar dungeon, wine cellar dungeon, that could be taken off and put on weapons and armor pieces. I think people would go for that just because it looks nice. It's kind of like a fashion statement, you know, so that would give people a reason to farm them. That is one of the big things. But also, I mean, there's a lot of dungeons in the game, and I'm gonna go actually, because I've played MMOs in the past, and what I wanted to say is the point of a dungeon is to be difficult, to challenge the player, and that's why I say I want these dungeons to be challenging. In all the games, in all the MMOs I've played, I've always enjoyed when the dungeons were a challenge. Same thing, for example, for Ark. I like the boss fights. They are challenging. They are not easy. They're meant to be challenging, whereas most of the dungeons in the game are not challenging anymore. Now, Obviously, I know that the devs, or I've heard or read somewhere that the devs want to look at the dungeons, and I'm going to cover that later, or the older dungeons, and I'll cover that later because I have some ideas with regards to that. But as I was saying, they need to have something to give us some sort of a challenge, especially the PvE community. If the PvP community don't want to do it, that's fine, but also a way of scaling up the dungeon. So for example, as you level up, you can do the dungeons as they are, but maybe introducing a scaling up mechanic where once you reach level 60, you can then scale up the dungeon just before you enter it. So for example, just before you're about to go into the dungeon, it asks you with a prompt if you want to scale up the difficulty, and gives you the option to what to scale up the difficulty to. Obviously, the more difficult the dungeon is, the better the rewards. And another thing that they can do, if they do this, is to add fragments of, say, a certain item in specific dungeons. So for example, let's say there's this wonderful, magnificent sword that people are trying to get. This sword is crafted out of 4 pieces or 3 pieces. You can have the handle, the crossguard, the blade, all scattered about in separate dungeons with a very rare chance of dropping. And once you get this is a magnificent, wonderful looking weapon that people will want to farm. That gives people a reason to farm the dungeons. But also, what I find and what I would like to see more is more of a story to the dungeon. Why are we doing the dungeon? What's the purpose of the dungeon? What happened in the dungeon? You know, give us a bit of a story to immerse ourselves in the world of Conan. Now, the Conan world, as it stands, is okay, but there's very little immersion because it lacks a main story. There are all these little bits of lore and stuff to find and fun to find and search for, but there's no big story. It's called Conan Exiles, the game, but there's very little to do with Conan, in my opinion, apart from the fact that Conan appears in a cinematic at the beginning, then he cuts you off the cross, and then you meet him, and he forever resides in that tavern where he just stands there enjoying the presence of the performers, and I'm guessing drinking. Now, I'd like to find out more about Conan. Why is he there? What's he doing there? Maybe do some quests with him. And this brings me to my next thing. I would think and would like to see some sort of quest lines, you know, but the quest lines to have a story. And I think people would definitely pick this up and follow the story just to see what's going on. But also, when you do the quest lines, have some interesting rewards. They don't have to be powerful. They have to be unique. Stuff that you only get by doing the storyline and no way else. Now, that basically what I'm trying to say is I'd like to have more interaction with Conan himself, because this is Conan Exiles. Yes, you are an exile, but it's also to do with Conan. You know, Conan is a big part of the title for the game, so I'd like to see more of Conan and interact with him. Now, a thing just as a suggestion, say Conan goes to help someone and then he goes missing, so you have to find where Conan is. Therefore, you start going through camps, which then leads you to, so when I say going through camps, I mean going through hostile NPC camps to find out what happened to Conan, which then leads you to one dungeon, then leads you to another dungeon. So you can have like a little story going on. I think that would be pretty nice. Now, obviously, this is just for Conan, but there are other characters that you could, or the devs at Funcom could definitely create this little story arc, and it would make it more immersive. It would make the player feel more immersed in the game, in what the map is offering. So, I mean, the quests don't have to be complicated, and as long as there's like a little tab in your menu for quest log that tells you the quest and what you need to do, but again, not too much detail. You have to find it by yourself. You have to figure out what to do, and I think that would be nice. I think that would be a bit of a brain teaser that people would love, those that would like it. Obviously, I know I would, and I definitely would make guides on stuff like that, and I think it would be fun to try and discover what's going on and stuff like that. This is just another thought with regards to the game mechanics. And then the other thing that I think would add a lot more to the game, again, within the lore of Conan, is more explorable areas. Now, when I say that, there's a area just up north right in between the volcano and the marshlands or whatever they're called. That's an empty area. Now I know that in the past the devs said they don't want to do that. They can't do that because it will push the game mechanics, the servers, to their limit. And what I think they're doing wrong there is that they're thinking about doing it as an area where you build. And my answer to that is no, make it as an area where you can explore it, much like the unnamed city. So you can't build in the unnamed city. You can build around it, but not within it, with bosses, with items to find, with secrets to look for, and stuff like that in that area. And as well as in the unnamed city, you can make secret entrances into dungeons that will, for example, add to the story. Now, going back to the dungeon topic, because I did say that, but I don't know if I said it or expressed myself as I should have. When I said that the old dungeons are easy, I'd like to see them kept in that manner, but then as you scale up at level 60, if you want to revisit them, you can revisit them scaled up for level 60 as far as difficulty goes, but not just difficulty. Maybe that dungeon is now different. There's different NPCs, different bosses to fight, different mechanics to worry about, and ultimately, if the devs really wanted to, they can push it to an even harder difficulty for those that really want the challenge. Obviously, for this to actually work, the rewards would have to be worthwhile, both in terms of the gear, both in terms of what they can get out. But as I said, if they scatter, say, parts and pieces of, say, equipment, gear, items that are or would be desirable across multiple dungeons, and people would have a reason to farm them over and over again. So say what they did with the Lifeblood Spear and the Sword of Crom. Now obviously this would only work providing they don't nerf it, and it doesn't have to be seriously overpowered. It can just be something that looks amazing, and people will want it for the purpose of having it as a fashion statement, if that makes sense. Now this could be a recipe that you unlock, so you get the recipe for the hilt, you get the recipe for the blade in one place, then you get the recipe for the crossguard in another place, and so on. So that way, if a person in PvP gets killed, they may lose the weapon, but they still have the recipe. The recipe, of course, will allow you to also repair it. Without the recipe, you can't repair it. Therefore, it makes that weapon more or less useless in the hands of a player that hasn't unlocked these. So they can use it until the durability is gone, but once the durability is gone on that particular weapon, that person cannot use it. It's broken and it's just more or less junk. So that would kind of be a mechanic that would be interesting to see. These are just some ideas from my experience as an MMO player. I think this game is really good and has a lot to offer, but at times, with regards to the lore, the story, it feels sometimes a bit bland. There's not all that much going on. So, for example, the lore stones, they are amazing, but you know, it just needs that bit more. If you do quests, by doing quests, you're actually interacting with the environment. You're getting drawn into the story of the environment, of the world that Conan Exiles offer. You feel like you're a part of it. It's not just building. I think this is the sort of game that could do a perfect crossover between the survival and building aspect of survival games and mix it with the storytelling aspect of MMOs. So this is one of the things that kind of frustrates me sometimes, because I'd like to see that there is definitely place for it in this game. It does have the right environment, and I think they could definitely add that, and it would keep people interested and give them something to do. This is my personal opinion on what I think would definitely add to the games. I mean, what do you guys think? What would you like to see? Do you agree with me? Would you want to see more stuff like that? And again, going back to the armors, I know that so far now, up to now in the game, they've all followed a more realistic design for armors. There's not been anything fancy or flashy or sparkly or with particle effects or with amazing lighting effects or a combination of the two. But I think that the devs can definitely add that into the game without actually going too far off the Conan lore, especially if they're planning on adding magic. So this could be a thing leading into the magic aspect of the game, so, or a combination of the two, and it would definitely go well with the story. I mean, there's definitely magic in the game, some form of it. They plan on adding more or evolving this sort of magic that's in there, so this can definitely be something that can be put into the game, and I think a lot of people will like it because of how the visuals would look. That is my personal opinion on the start. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. If you have, please let me know down below. Let me know what you would like to see more of in the game, where you think the game could improve. And I do realize that there are plenty of bugs that could be or should be fixed, and this video wasn't about covering bugs and the broken sides of the game. At the end of the day, from my experience, all online games or all online multiplayer and games like that do have a side to them where they are broken. There's bugs, there's glitches. It's going to happen, and I get that. I'm talking about mechanics in the game that would add to it, that would make the world more immersive and more fun to explore. Things to explore, things to do in the game. That is it from me, folks. I do hope that you have enjoyed it. If you have, please don't forget to support me and the channel by hitting that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you're new and haven't already for more similar content from myself. And if you have just subscribed, why not check out some of my other videos and guides here on the channel. Who knows, you might just enjoy them. Also, for those interested, you can always find me on the Sethtopia Discord. Links to this, of course, you can find down below in the video description, as well as in a pinned comment from myself. Until next time, stay safe, folks.